Ready?
Ready. Take one.
A little bit of a delay today.
Yeah. Anyway, we're all set to go. We going? We're moving? We're rolling? Is it happening? Okay, well, good to see all you guys today. And I think some other people are going to be showing up a little later.
Yeah, Jeremy and Renee will be down here in just a few minutes.
So anyway.
I got dog duty up at Angels. I got
I'll
go
pop
feed the
in.
puppy and make sure that's tended to.
It's good to have you. It's good to have you joining us online, wherever you might
Susan
be.
says it's all good, loud and clear.
Yeah, wherever you might be.
5 by 5.
Yeah, so it's a beautiful Sabbath morning here, and we just want to
Titus is with us, I think.
Thank you for joining us again. Great to have you, as always. Coming to you live from our family room. Just sitting here, just praising the Lord for all His many wonderful blessings. So, anyway, I want to just invite you to pause for just a second here, and we'll go to the Lord in prayer. Father, we do want to thank you and praise you for who you are. You are the sovereign of the universe. And you do so much in our lives, in our behalf, always working to bless us in so many wonderful ways. And so we want to thank you for that. We also realize, Lord, that you want to instruct us and teach us from your words. So thank you for providing that and for inspiring it through your Holy Spirit, which we invite now to come and to be our teacher, to guide and direct us. And so thank you, Lord, for providing that most necessary aspect of our time together. I want to thank you for those who are here, those who may be coming, those who are watching. And we do ask, Lord, that you help prepare us for your soon return. We know that the time is short, and we're asking, Father, that you would equip us, fit us up for the time ahead. And we ask these mercies in Jesus' most wonderful name. We also pray that you would be with those on our prayer list. Lord, you know all of the concerns and all of the issues. We just pray you draw near to each person and guide and direct in their circumstance. And we ask this also in the name of our Most High Savior. We do pray, Lord, that as we go through our time together, that we'll receive the blessing you have for us. And we ask it in Jesus' worthy name. Amen and amen.
Amen.
Okay, so you all know the drill here. I mean, if you want something to grab, some drink or whatever, help yourself. We take the first few minutes of our time, and we are running a little bit late. We apologize for that because of some technical issues. So when you're plugged into the to streaming into the internet, those things are always a potential to happen. At any rate, we're up and rolling, and we take the few first minutes of our time to talk about experiences that maybe somebody would like to share throughout the week. Any way that you recognize that the Lord is blessed in a marvelous way. We take a lot of things for granted during our week.
No.
But the fact that we're here and we're thinking and we're able to function somewhat normally is a real blessing. And so we don't ever want to take God's the life that has been provided today for granted. And so we want to thank the Lord for that. Anybody else want to share anything that happened throughout the week? Anything phenomenal that you guys have been out of town all week and been running the highways. Obviously, they're pretty dangerous. So
I posted on Facebook, I think it was this morning anyways, about driving on the highway.
I wondered why you were doing that when you were supposed to be on your way here.
Right? It was just an afterthought, morning thoughts.
Remembering the wonderful drive down here.
Yeah, was that like nobody on the highway wants to have a following distance, an appropriate following distance. You're supposed to be like a minimum of 3 seconds behind somebody.
right.
And everyone likes to crowd super close together, and I was just thinking, that's probably why so many people die on the highways, because nobody wants to respect distance. And actually, like, you know, they assume because there's this gap between you that you're going slower than the person in front of you, so everyone keeps cutting in front of you and eliminating their follow distance.
Sure.
And, you know, with no time to stop, you just end up hitting each other.
Yeah, should some chain reaction begin, typically that does happen quite a bit.
Yeah.
I think most people that are driving down the highway believe that they can stop in time. So
I think that's very telling of human nature, though, because I think people treat their salvation the same way. It's, no, I'll be able to get it together at the last second.
yeah, they assume, right? Exactly.
We human beings are predictable that way.
Yeah, actually, there's some interesting spiritual lessons that can be derived from driving. We don't have to go into all those, but there are some interesting lessons there. So, we're, as some of you probably are aware, we're building another building on the property. I just finally got my building permits in, and it was a blessing to find out that the cost for the permits, I thought it was going to be much more than it was. And so that was a blessing to finally get all that paperwork straightened out and whatnot. So anyway.
Pretty cool. We were also in the camp. We were warned just in time about black bears being at our cabin. Apparently, there's a black bear with 3 cubs, like right at our front door.
Next to our cabin.
Yeah. So, like the guy,
Memorable camp experience.
the guy
So
driving.
we were in the process of walking down the
Just
hill
want
to
a
our
handout,
cabin.
that's all.
And there's
Yeah,
kind
looking
of-
for some grub.
we were walking down there kind of late at night, and the guy who was running the transport shuttle was coming up the hill, and he was like, "There's like a black bear and 3 cubs by your cabin. He goes, do you want to ride down?" And we're like, "Sure." Sure, we could get a ride down.
Yeah. Yeah, of course, anymore now. Rose was telling me earlier about a story about a woman who somehow discovered that there was a mountain lion that had come into her house, into the family room or living room, and was sleeping behind the sofa.
Yeah, it
Apparently.
was inside the house.
Yeah, well, apparently she even took some pictures from outside. And then I guess at some point after the mountain lion had a nap, it just got up and left, didn't it, Rose?
Yeah, got it. She said she was sending you telepathic messages, which
Oh, well,
made the story
Yeah.
a lot more interesting.
yeah, okay.
Right?
But anyway, it got up and finally left. But obviously,
But it was a big one.
as people branch out into more rural areas,
Wildlife
You're gonna-
decides to move to the city.
wildlife decides to move in to the urban areas. Yeah. So, but of course, you have to be somewhat careful. You have to be somewhat careful. It's probably a good thing. What did God do? What did God do in Genesis chapter 9 after the flood? You know, this was actually something that Noah expressed concern about the animal kingdom, didn't he? Yeah, he expressed concern to God about the animal kingdom. What did God do?
Put the fear of man now.
Put the fear of man in the animals. Noah was concerned that because he had all these animals on the ark and there were only 8 of them, 8 of humanity left, he was concerned that the animals would get the idea, hey, we can take over the planet, you know.
Rid the world of this sin.
Rid the world
problem.
of these sinful human beings, you know. So anyway, God took care of that, and that seems to work. It worked pretty well, except when you have a mama and some cubs. You know, when that overrides the fear of man
Well, I think that still is a fear of man. They're afraid of what man might do.
to their babies.
To their babies.
So they have
Protecting the baby.
they have to come to the rescue. Yeah, you don't want to mess with a mama bear at all. Anyway,
You don't even want to be around her
yeah,
whenever them cubs is hiding in the bushes either.
okay.
Another interesting experience up at camp was we were talking with one of the people up there who's like in charge of music and all that,
Mhm.
and we were talking about the concept of a world of pure good versus, because he was, you know, it's a pretty politically correct camp, and so they emphasize all this stuff about equality and, you know, equal this and equal that, and not being exclusive, et cetera, et cetera. And so, but we were talking about the idea that a world could exist where there was nothing but good. And he was talking about the idea that, well, there always has to be a balance of good and evil. It could never be just good. But after discussing it for a while, he was coming to the conclusion, and he's not a Christian or anything, but he was presenting the idea where he said, in his mind, in order for there to be a world, such a thing as pure good, it has to be a world of pure law. where there is pure obedience to that law. And I just thought that was an interesting conclusion for a non-Christian to come to, that for there to be like perfect harmony and perfect good, there would have to be perfect law.
Oh, and there has to be, because you see how we are right now. If we were in a place where we had no restrictions of any kind on us as human beings, look where we go with it. You know, everybody doing their own thing. What if we had no traffic lights or stop signs?
You'd have a lot more accidents.
I mean, those laws are there to ensure that everybody can travel safely on the roads. They're not just arbitrary, although some small districts where they put in the speed traps is another story. But generally speaking, the traffic laws are there so that everybody can get where they have to go without crashing into each other. You have to have some form of law in order to have a reasonable society. You just, you know, that maybe as human beings, when we don't have a perfect nature and don't have any more interest in sin, maybe that would be a whole lot different.
Well, natural law runs the universe.
True.
I mean,
To some extent.
there's so much of law within science that basically runs and coordinates the universe, God's creation. So it makes sense that the new Jerusalem, when the world's created new, it just makes sense that it's all going to rest on the foundation of God's law. So it'll be a place where there will be no evil. You know, so he was just describing God's new creation. He was describing heaven, if you will.
Yeah, well, that was what my mind was going to, because
Everybody's in harmony, right?
Even though
It's
that's
total
not
harmony.
where his mind was going, it was interesting to see that what he was describing was actually exactly what the
His ideal was not lawlessness.
Yeah.
His
right.
idea was that the law had to be there.
Lawlessness
there has
produces
to be a law
chaos.
for there to be perfect good and perfect harmony.
Right.
And he used it using the analogy of a game called Dungeons and Dragons, where he was talking about how you pick like a topic where you can be like chaotic good or chaotic evil or pure this, pure that, and, you know. But it was interesting that was his conclusion, because that would also require that there be a standard by which we judge and determine law and what the standard is. You know.
Anything earth-shattering.
Shattering.
Earth-shadowing?
Earth-shadowing.
An
Earth-shattering.
eclipse, I guess.
Yeah, an eclipse. Well, there was one of those.
There's a lunar eclipse, I think, last night that
last
wasn't
night.
visible in this part of the world, but it was apparently a pretty long
Anything
one.
earth-shaking in the news that you may have noticed? I mean, the typical things are still going on.
No news is good news.
Yeah.
Steel
Big fires in California.
fires,
Oh, really?
67 of them going in 13 states.
Yeah, pretty
Yeah, the
amazing.
wildfires are really a problem right now.
I know 500 just in
I don't know how
the latest one in
had anything
California.
left.
500 homes were destroyed. People are being killed.
Is Hawaii still?
Hawaii's
Still
still
erupting.
rolling.
They said that volcano has produced more land than in the last
Fukushima
last
is
month and a
still
half than
pumping out
in the last
radiation.
100 years.
You know, you still got all this ongoing stuff that you don't really hear about too much.
They're going to have to figure out what to do when the eruption stops and they decide they want to do something with the land that was formed by the volcano, because they're going to have to map a whole new territory.
Yeah.
Add a little chunk to Hawaii.
Well, the neat thing is that the lava there breaks down into really good, rich soil fairly quickly because of the tropical climate.
Yeah.
So once it creates that land, it goes into soil and the vegetation comes up
Hundreds of
very
years,
fast.
Which
Well,
is
I don't think I'd want to build
No,
on
it doesn't take
knowing
hundreds
that
of years there.
I would have to look into that, but I mean, lava typically takes quite a while to break down because it's rock.
No, it's not. It's molten rock, but
Yeah,
it's
molten rock that cools.
but as it cools, it forms into soil. It doesn't form into rock. It's sedimentary. And so it
Sedimentary,
becomes,
my dear Watson.
yes.
Unless like it,
Maybe that's where I'll see
unless it
that
keeps
through.
on piling up behind us
Lots-
without hardening.
Yeah, some little
Okay.
light.
Then it kind of pours right.
Yeah.
There was an earthquake in Saskatchewan, Susan said. 3.8.
Wow. How close to home is that, I wonder?
She said that was a good distance away from
Good
them.
distance, yeah.
But the interesting thing is that they've discovered this week that this Cascadia subduction zone is actually showing some pretty intense movement right now. And they had a 5.8 off the coast between Oregon and California this week. So they're saying that this Cascadia fault line could be very, I mean, it could take out from Washington State and Vancouver all the way down to Northern California if it goes.
And of course, we had some one of the other big things in the news this week was the financial numbers. Right, the economy ticked up according to their records, according to their figures, 4.1% this second quarter's ticked up. So that's
The economy is better, but not for Facebook
very
and Twitter.
impressive, right? In terms of people that track all that, that's very impressive for them. But how does that play into last day events?
Sudden drop after things look like they're getting better.
It's going to end up, we don't need nothing, we got it all.
Yeah.
Pretty much it's a roller coaster. It's that like the top, where you're at the very top, and then it just drops down.
Another interesting survey that was done. One reporter went out, and they were doing a question. They were questioning people at colleges. He went to college campuses. I think he said he went to like 50 college campuses, and they were asking people, do you think that everybody should have everything they want free? Free education, free health care, free this, free that, free housing, whatever, all these free things. Basically, they were asking, are you in favor of this, a socialistic type of political government? And of course, a lot of people that this guy surveyed said, oh, absolutely, mostly younger people, absolutely everything ought to be free. And so then he followed up with the question, well, how's it going to be paid for? Who's going to pay for? And that was the interesting part of the question. Because people stopped and they would say, well, the government ought to pay for it, right? And he says, well, where does the government get their resources? Well, from people, from taxes. And I guess if you're young and you're not paying taxes, if you're in school and you're not really paying taxes, well, then let somebody else pay the taxes, and then they can provide the money for all their free stuff. So you see how that all works, how the thinking goes. But it was kind of a revelation. And some people stopped and actually thought about it, and they said, well, you see, taxes, we pay the taxes. Actually, we should pay for everything. We should be paying for everything for everybody free.
You're paying for it.
So, you can imagine, the mental gymnastics that some of these folks had to go through in order to finally realize that, well, wait a minute, if everything is free and everybody gets everything free and it has to be paid for, I'm paying for it. I'm actually paying for it.
The whole problem is that we've switched from being a cash economy to being one largely on credit. And it's a big difference when you're paying for stuff with cash. You get your paycheck or your monthly check or whatever, and you cash that, and you divide it into wherever it has to go. When you're paying for stuff with cash, you're conscious of where the money is. But when you're using a check or a credit card or electronic stuff, you don't have a sense of that money going here and there and everywhere so much. And when we switched to that, everybody began to think less realistically about money, especially when credit cards became the big deal back in the late 60s, early 70s, and everybody had access to easy credit. People could go have it all right now with their credit cards instead of waiting for it and paying for it.
Yeah.
And so people began to live on credit. And then the trouble is that as the economy got worse, the income got lower or dropped or jobs were lost.
Sure.
And as soon as you hit that and you no longer have the steady income to count on, then you got to worry about how you're going to pay those bills.
But anyway, there's a temporary optimism that exists concerning the economy today, and of course it's being really touted as being something phenomenal. The Bible talks about economic distress in the last days. And one of the things that, it's nice to be optimistic, and it's nice to have a job, and it's nice to be making money, and things are going along smoothly, you're paying your bills and whatnot. But there will come a moment in time when the rug will be pulled out from under us. Why will the rug be pulled out from under the economy? What's the mechanism that will allow for that? It's one word, actually, and that's debt. Okay, because we have amassed, what's already been put in place is the thing that will collapse the economy. Okay? And I know that might sound, negative and horrific to people when there's this optimism, but we need to be realistic, and we need to be somewhat prepared for that time, that inevitability. And Scripture says that's where it's going to go, and indeed that's already been set in place and set in motion. How indebted are we as a country right now?
we're way behind. I mean, we are in debt.
What's the figure you typically hear?
I don't remember.
Typically hear the national debt, right?
Yeah, 20 trillion.
Well, the national debt is just a portion of the overall debt of our country, right? So, typically they say the national debt's like 21 trillion. And even that in itself, you could never climb out of that, because it's got an interest rate that just keeps snowballing, okay? That's why it's going up so quickly, because of the interest. A long time ago in our country, all the tax money that was collected in the country wouldn't even pay the interest on the debt. So you're constantly digging a deeper hole as you go, as optimistic as you want to be. But even that's just a portion. Actually, the more correct number is more like 60 to 65 trillion is really the amount of debt on just our country. Okay? So there's absolutely no way to overcome a staggering amount like that. And so if at some point, when the time is right, the Bible says calamity will occur and the rug will be pulled out. The balloon will be popped, if you will, and it will collapse. Okay.
It's going to be messy. You know what happens when you pop a balloon?
Yeah, you just have to know. You just have to be informed, so that hopefully you've made a little preparation in that regard. And for God's people, of course, it's going to mean a very difficult time, because Scripture tells us, and we've been studying the book of Revelation, and we're up to chapter 15 now, and we've already gone through 13, which talks about a time when God's people would not be able to buy or sell. Okay, so that's economic distress on a targeted group of people. Okay, if you're in that group, if you've decided to stand on the side of right and righteousness and holiness, whatnot, if you have made that choice to stand on that side despite what everything looks like, you're going to be in that group that will not receive the mark of the beast, will not be able to buy or sell, and will eventually have a death decree put on you. So, I mean, that's kind of where it all goes. And what's all that
That's
designed?
a really long leap for the person who doesn't understand the background of that.
Yeah, and what's that all designed to do? Right? It's designed to eliminate the faithful, to eliminate God's people. Satan has no choice but to go that way. He has no, because his ambition is, of course, to perpetuate his existence. And the only way he can do that, the only way he can kind of take over, control the entire world, is to eliminate God's people, and that's what he is attempting to do. So, in light of that background, that backdrop, what kind of people? Paul asks that question. What kind of people ought you to be in light of what you're heading toward? When you look in Scripture, we mentioned last week that God always rears up. Paul wrote about 2/3 of the New Testament. Basically, his letters, Pauline epistles and letters to various places that he had visited. And he's trying to encourage them. He's trying to prepare them for this Christian dispensation that is going to ensue, or has ensued.
Actually, he was trying to get them through the crisis, because he was in the midst, when he was converted, he was in the midst of the persecution of the Christians that had begun.
Yes, absolutely.
And that persecution continued for quite some time after his death. In fact, he was one of the ones who was martyred for his faith. So he's watching a group of people that are trying to maintain their faith under the worst of circumstances.
Exactly. They were being targeted, absolutely. And when you look back through Bible history, you find that God has reared up a person. He chose Abraham, to kind of begin the Jewish era of time. Here's Paul beginning kind of the Christian, trying to get people through the beginning of the Christian era. God raised up Moses, to bring people out of bondage and slavery, out of Egypt. So typically, God works this way even through one person. Even through one person. I mean, Paul is still even working today. Moses is still working today with his message. Abraham. All these guys still are contributing to what we need to get us through the last days. Right? And so,
kind of unrelated, but somewhat there. I heard an interesting quote at camp from Albert Einstein, from one of the guys who was talking about saving the planet through preserving things like the bees and stuff.
Right,
but
eliminating the straws.
Yeah, but he brought up the point of, or he brought up that Albert Einstein estimated that when the bees are gone, mankind only has 4 years left on the planet. That's what Albert Einstein's.
Yeah.
And it's true because bees are absolutely
Bees.
essential for everything that grows.
Right.
Yeah, he was
If we
saying
lose,
that
if we
after 4
lose the
years,
bees, we
every
have no more
man will
fruit,
die.
no vegetables,
Yeah, we'll have to come up
no,
with
no
some
grass growing. All
synthetic-
those things depend on bees.
synthetic way of trying to
Synthetic
do what
pollen.
the bees do. Yeah.
Synthetic bees.
Maybe that's why they're spraying. Maybe they could put some stuff in the spray that they're doing to pollinate stuff. You know, just a thought out there. You know, who knows? Right?
Imagine the allergies if they sprayed pollen.
Oh yeah. Well, and then that promotes the drug usage,
I
right?
think
So that-
as far as I'm
promotes-
concerned, the hay and the is it goldenrod? What's the one that's the allergy?
Ragweed.
Ragweed. Yeah,
Yeah.
those do a good job of spraying plenty of pollen.
Well,
Yeah.
birds too often. Birds and
The birds
other
and the
insects.
bees, what,
birds and bees.
the birds, they control the insects and the bees pollinate everything, and if you ain't got that, you're in trouble.
Yeah. Well, I know for a long time they've been concerned about the oceans, you know, harvesting all of the fish out of the oceans and how the oceans play such a vital part in our whole ecosystem in terms of providing for what we as human beings need. I mean, there's no question, the Bible tells us pretty plainly that the earth is waxing old like a garment, and that means it has an effect on all of nature. Humanity has found, I mean, we're thinking people, we're innovative, we've found a way to, I mean, you can grow vegetables with not even any soil. You know, you can, aquaponics, you know, hydroponics, I mean, you can do all these technical things. You don't even need soil anymore, right? You just need chemicals. But humanity, it seems, has often found a way to survive despite the fact that, you know, we may have affected adversely a portion of nature or the planet.
What's the old saying is necessity is the mother of all invention?
Right, right. But Scripture, the plan of salvation has a timetable. And we can track back and look at that timetable throughout history, and we can see that we're coming down to a termination place, right? When human probationary time is going to expire, right? Or at least scheduled to expire. And we know Scripture tells us that God is going to step in, Christ is going to step in, even before then, to preserve righteousness, to preserve those who have taken a stand for Him and for truth. So we know all that's playing out. So what kind of people do we need to be? We started looking last week at Romans chapter 12, and because Paul was specifically working with the Jewish people there, as Rose was saying, to try to get them through, you know, that early time of persecution that the church was experiencing. And not only did Paul have to contend with the perversion, the ideology from the Jewish leadership that had prevailed for hundreds and hundreds of years and had put all these policies and regulations in place, you know, over 600 different laws and regulations to try to say, you know, we're going to make ourselves holy and righteous by following all these rules and regulations. And Paul is trying to say that means, you know, you got a zeal for God, but it's not appropriate. That's not what's going to save you. You know, you can keep all the rules and regulations that you would like.
Like he says, a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge,
Not
which means
according
they
to
had the
knowledge.
emotion,
They had the emotion.
but not the whole on truth.
Right. They had half the equation. Christian dispensation came along. They focused on the other half. And then, of course, Satan took advantage of that.
You threw out the baby with the bathwater.
And then you had the Christian dispensation, to be honest, and we've talked about this many times, but the Christian dispensation today is really, truly no better off than the Jewish dispensation was back during their reign, if you will, or their time in the sun. And that's because each only had half the equation. Okay, we've talked about that. The Jews focused on the law, right, and rejected the blood. The Christians focused on the blood and reject the law. Okay, so they're both in the same boat per se, only focusing on half of the equation, not bringing that marriage of both together, which is what is necessary. In chapter 12, we finished up around verse 9.
What verse are we in again?
Romans chapter 12, verse 9. And so we wanted to just run through the rest of that chapter, and then we're going to go someplace else as well. But we did focus last week on 1 Corinthians 13, which some people call the love chapter. And we talked about, of course, the Bible uses the word charity, in its explanation of love. But of course, the Greek word is agape, right? That's the Greek word. And agape means a self-sacrificial love. And Paul's coming along here, and he says, "Let love be without hypocrisy." How can you have hypocrisy if you have love?
It's not real love?
It's not real. That's what hypocrisy is. Hypocrisy is you're living a lie, right? And so it has to be real love. And that's what agape is. Agape is real love. We went through that chapter last week. It knows no bounds. It has no limitations. It's not this, it's not that. It's real. He goes on to say, so basically he's saying, be real in your Christian experience. How many people, when they go to church on a weekly basis, they kind of put the robe of Christianity on, but then all during the week, it's not there, or it's not evident, right? And so a lot of people, they put it on, they take it off. They put it on, they take it off. And it's as if they're like a chameleon, whatever circumstance they find themselves in, that's the way that they live, that's the way that they talk, that's the way that they behave.
Do as the Romans do.
Yeah, so that's not Christianity, that's not real Christianity, that's not real love, when you take it off and put it on, kind of.
Well, the word hypocrite comes from the Greek, meaning play act.
Play acting.
They're
right.
pretenders.
Pretenders. They're theater, they're in the theater, right? And that's what all theater is. It's play acting. Okay, so be a real, be a real Christian, and not a hypocrite. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good. This isn't like a suggestion that Paul is offering here. This isn't a preference that he's saying you need to be good. It needs to be a preference in your life. Now preference is, of course, a first choice, but it's not your only choice. Right? There are some people that may would have liked to have come here today. They would have preferred to have been here, but something came up. Something prevented them from being here. So they had a choice. The first choice was to come here, but then something came up and it ended up causing them to go somewhere else. Okay? That's a preference. This is cling to what
But a
is
conviction
good.
is something that doesn't change.
A conviction is something that is also your first choice, but that is your only choice. Right? So there's a difference between a preference and a conviction. Both are a first choice, but one allows for additional choices, the other does not.
Well, the early Christian church came to the place where the Roman government gave them the choice. You can worship Caesar or you can worship your God and face death.
Right.
And for many of the Christians, their only option was to worship God because worshiping Caesar was not an option.
Right, and that they became, of course, martyrs. Right? And that's so one of the things that one characteristic of a person that is a martyr is that they are living their faith by conviction, not by preference. Okay? Cling to that which is good. It's not a preference, it's a conviction.
How do you cling to that which is good, though?
Yeah, how do you cling to that which is good?
And how do you learn to abhor that which is evil?
Yeah. Good question.
What triggers those two faith attitudes? How do we come to the place where we abhor evil? I mean, if Paul's telling us to do this, there has
Sure.
to be a way to do it.
Right. I would think the first thing you need is discernment.
Yeah, studying,
right? What's that?
studying, prayer.
Okay. That's going to also enhance discernment, right? Studying prayer. That's gaining knowledge and insight, which gives you the ability to make the
I
right
think
choice.
you have to pray for discernment. I don't think most people have discernment naturally. I think the devil has co-opted our society so much that discernment, I mean, we call it discernment now, we call it common sense. It isn't common anymore, is it? I mean, you look at people and they can't figure out how they got into the mess they're in, much less how to get out of it. Because they're reacting from one emotion to another, one circumstance to another. They have no conviction that guides their life. So they just go with the flow wherever it takes them. We all watched water when it rains. Where does the flow go? Down the drain.
Downhill.
So if we go with the flow, we're going to be lost.
Follows the path of least resistance.
Right. So to be able to abhor that which is evil, we need to pray for the discernment. Because a lot of people can study and pray. The Jews studied and prayed, and they still didn't recognize him when he came.
Right.
The priests and the scribes, they studied constantly. They taught scriptures constantly. If anybody should have recognized him, it should have been them. And they prayed long, beautiful, flowery prayers in public places where everybody could hear them.
Sure.
So they did study and pray. But study and prayer alone is not enough. It has to be a desire for a heart change that changes us from the inside. You know, the Jews and the Pharisees were concerned about changing the outside. That's why Jesus called them whitewashed tombs. You know, you've got this pretty looking thing on the outside, and inside it's nothing but death. We don't want to be like that.
Society has reached the point where 2/3 of the apple, is rotten,
Just eat around the bad spots, right?
And to,
Crime continuously,
Yeah.
and with all the other things that's going on.
and if you're clinging to that which is good, that's something that's intentional.
That also means you have to have the discernment to know what is good.
Yeah, it's intentional. It's not.
That's why sorry, I didn't mean to keep interrupting you. The seven churches,
Yeah.
Laodicea, the first thing he told them was to ask, buy of me eye salve. The eye salve is discernment.
So you can
These
see,
people in the last days need discernment, so we need to be asking him for that discernment. I guess it goes back to that illustration about how do you know counterfeit money versus real money?
Well, in that sense, you've studied the original.
You studied the
You-
true.
You know the true.
They
better
don't.
than
They
it
don't.
is.
They don't learn about counterfeiting by studying the counterfeit money.
Right.
They learn by studying the truth, so they know it so well
They look at the
that when they see the counterfeit, they recognize where the differences
so
are.
many things outside of that. Yeah. So anyway, this has to be an intentional move to follow that which is good.
I'm just watching for the comments telling me to be quiet and let you talk.
Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love, in honor giving preference to one another. This is really something that the Jews actually had, I think, really taken to heart. I mean, even today, when what you have today is you have a lot of Jewish people being very successful, and one of the reasons for their success is this principle right here. They support one another.
yeah,
And
they do that.
Of course, what's their real motivation for supporting one another? Do you think? I don't think it has much to do with spirituality.
They have more trust in one another than they did anybody
Money,
else.
power.
Yeah, I think it's money and power, and they understand probably. I mean, they've been an oppressed people, right? And so they understand that there's a tremendous bias against them already from everybody else, from the rest of the world. And so I think I think it's just printed on their DNA, in their personality, that if we don't help each other, nobody else is going to. You know.
And that's a total contradiction to the world of business, where it's dog eat dog, it's all for me, and if you don't get any, tough luck.
Yeah, I mean, in the Jewish culture, they'll pay more for their goods and materials. They'll pay more to get their lawn done because it's a Jewish person that has owns that service. Then they don't let the amount sway them. They don't look for the cheapest.
Well, they know that the same thing comes back to them. They support
same
their
thing,
local
right.
their local
Exactly.
friends and family. They know that they're going to
That
support
comes
them
back
too
in.
in whatever they're doing. So you know that this is a mutual thing, and what a difference it would make in our society if we felt this way about supporting our local people.
Okay, but even outside from that, because that's dealing with kind of an economy, but what about in the church? I mean, I don't see this really playing out so much in the church environment as it really should. To prefer one another, what does that mean?
You'd rather work with them, you'd rather help them, you'd rather tend to their needs.
Well, I mean, people in church are just like everybody else. They have issues and problems and concerns, and they're living, trying to get through this whole world the best way they know how. But to be honest with you, is everybody that's in a church pew, are they saints? Hardly, right?
Hardly.
Well, in the Catholic
I mean-
sense of the word. you mean.
I mean, hardly. I mean, a church is a hospital for sinners, and sinners all of us make mistakes, and sometimes we're deplorable in certain areas. How hard is it? How difficult? Is it a real challenge for us to prefer one another? When we see, especially when you see the rough edges that need to be kind of trimmed off of people.
And is this in any way at odds with what Jesus said, where he talked about preferring your own people over other people?
Why? Again, we go back to the reasoning and
Susan
the
says
motive
that's
of why.
absolutely correct about supporting each other.
Yeah, I mean, why is it necessary for, as Paul is saying here, another person that has embraced faith is a brother, is a sister, right? Why is it important for us to prefer them over? I mean, who are we preferring them over?
The world?
Yeah, the secular world.
Other
Okay.
people, would you?
Right. So someone of faith should have an advantage in terms of your interest, your support, your inspiration. They should have an advantage over somebody that's just in the world. But I don't really see that. I mean, do you all see that playing out like that in the church? I don't really see that. I think it's almost like what Rose is saying. It's kind of a dog-eat-dog, attitude a lot of times.
Yeah, there's a church in Blacksburg, I forgot the name of it. Come with me sometime. But what's interesting is they've actually got a pretty good self-supporting thing going, where they've got a couple business owners in the church who only hire people from within that church.
Right.
Right.
And they hire, they do painting and a bunch of other stuff.
Well, here's the thing. It just talks about giving preference,
A Mormon style.
right? If you give preference to church members, if Jason wanted to hire some more people, he might want to give preference. He might not hire the people that he interviews from the church because they might not be qualified or able to do the job he wants done, but he would at least give them the first preference, right?
Jason's looking around
Jason's
like, do I
looking
have to
saying-
answer this?
I tried that once.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was about to
Yeah.
say.
But there's a big difference. I mean, I believe in supporting my church family first and foremost. If I can do something that will bless someone in my church family, if I'm going to pay out for a service, I would just as soon support someone in my church family first over somebody outside.
Outside, right.
But the other side of the coin
Because
is
because we know that people of faith, there's a bias against people of faith.
we know that we got an enemy that's against us.
We know we have an enemy that's against people of faith. And so we're always a target. In fact, what does Jesus say about people of faith? If you take my name, you are going to be hated by the world. Okay?
Susan says
So-
it was his instruction to us as it benefits the kingdom and it lifts him up
Yeah.
when we support each other. But you know, there's also the other side of the coin is that often people within the church think that because you're a fellow church member and you offer this service that I should get it for free or at a big discount
Right.
because I'm a church member.
Right.
And that's the wrong
That's
attitude.
inappropriate too.
The attitude should be, we'll support you in any way we can.
Right.
But when it comes to expectation, you should not expect someone to do something different for you because you're a believer.
Right.
In fact, you know, you should be willing to pay. If you're offering to do a lawn for $50 and somebody else is offering $50, I would give it to you first because you're part of my fellowship family. But I don't expect you to give me a discount just because we have that common ground.
But we would also give it to him if it was $60.
Right. But we also have an expectation because you're part of our family that you're going to do a really good job because you have a conscience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that makes a difference. I mean,
But and you know that's a very real thing. I've had people that think, oh, well, I know you, I go to church with you, or something like that, and they expect it for little to nothing.
yes.
You know, because they're not trying to benefit you; they want you to benefit them.
Exactly.
You know,
That's
it
exactly
goes back
right.
to that selfish mentality. I'm going to
Yes.
look out for me
Yeah.
and expect you to look out for me too, and you know, you'll be all right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Susan
that's
said,
exactly
we
right.
need to prove that we are worthy of that support and a workman is worthy of his hire. Which is a good spiritual principle.
And it says, "Be kindly affectionate one to another."
Back in Romans 12.
Yeah, that's in Romans 12. There.
Trying to keep
What-
up with the times.
Again, one of the things that you typically have.
First,
I mean, if you really want to see a warfare going on, go to almost any church congregation. Is that a true statement? I'm not.
Go to a
that's
church
true.
that's got a building program.
That's true.
You
statement.
will find conflict. What
Uh,
color are we going to do the carpet? What color will the pews be?
Yeah, I
Stained
mean,
glass or plain glass?
I mean, there have been
Wants to pop the
just.
whip.
I think I heard you say one time there was a split in a denomination because they couldn't come to a
It was the Amish.
consensus on, do you wear one strap or
One
two-
suspender or
one
two?
suspender, you know, a one suspender thing or a two suspender
There's
thing.
actually, it became a
church
branch of
split.
the Amish that was the one suspender Amish.
Yeah.
Because they felt that one crossed over, held your pants up just fine. Two was being showy.
Show exorbitant.
And the church literally split
Split.
over the suspenders.
And really, when you start looking at the history,
What held it up broke it up.
Again, you get a bunch of people together, different cultures, different backgrounds, different upbringings, different ideas, different thoughts. How does that unify? I mean, the gospel should unify. Should take precedent over any differences and unify that group of people. That's supposed to be the witness of Christianity. Is you got all this diversity, but yet it's moving forward in a unity because it believes in the gospel message.
That's why the disciples were together for Pentecost, before Pentecost,
Right.
was they had, they united in purpose, not necessarily in agreement of doctrine, let's say, but
Right.
they were all agreed in what they were going to do.
They
Sure.
put aside their differences,
Yeah.
but they also had a period of time where they put aside their sins too.
Yeah.
Where there was a heart searching in light of what had happened with the resurrection. They now knew this wasn't just their leader had been the Messiah. Now they came face to face with their leader was God. Now that's a total mind change from where they had been. I mean, they had walked with him, they ate with him, they all slept in the same place, they traveled together, they spent 3.5 very intense years, day and night, with each other for the most part. But they came to think of him as just a man like themselves. And then suddenly, with his resurrection, now they realized he wasn't just a Messiah, which in the historical sense of the word, they expected a Messiah to be a deliverer, that someone would come along who would be a champion. They never had any idea that it would be God himself.
And of course, Jesus, one of his favorite sayings to them was, "My kingdom is not of this world." I mean, he was trying to strongly suggest that we don't have to worry about all these differences down here that are, just incidental things. there's a kingdom to come. That's the important consideration, and the gospel message is the important message for us to get out. Yeah. That's why
One of the ladies, you know, I can't call her name, one of her sons to sit on Jesus' right hand, one on the
yeah.
left hand.
yeah.
She would come up with that.
That was the mother of the Sons of Thunder.
James and John. Yeah, that was their mom.
Yeah,
Susan
I
said
couldn't
they-
remember what her name was.
Susan said they pooled their resources and many were added daily to the church.
Yeah, when the focus becomes outward instead of inward, and you know, you mentioned a building. One of the things that happens when you end up with a church building is all of a sudden the focus becomes inward. You know, how do we keep up with this building, maintain this building, improve this building? How do we get people in this building?
Protect
You know,
it, staff the people to
Right.
take care of it.
So our focus becomes kind of inward then, and then the outward focus is lost sight of or grossly minimized, dramatically minimized. I think it was Chuck Swindoll that said, you know, we're like porcupines. You know, when you start getting close together and working in close proximity, you start to prick one another.
We
You know,
need
like
each
a
other,
porcupine.
but we needle each other,
Yeah,
he
we
said.
need each other but needle each other. So which is kind of cool. And that's what happens, that if you lose that outward focus, which was the mission, that's what happened to the Jews. You know, they were to open blinded eyes. They were to unstop deaf ears. They were to take a message to the world. But what did they do? They said, this is ours. They pulled their cloaks around them and said, look what we got. This is ours.
Give it to
We're
nobody
the children of Abraham. This is ours. You all stay away
In
because
fact,
you're
they were
filthy.
resentful of those who wanted to be
Yeah,
part of it
you're
because they
filthy.
just couldn't measure up, you know. They hadn't been born as children of Abraham, therefore they were second class.
So, church has in a lot of ways done the very same thing.
Susan said that in many churches the burden of debt encumbers them too.
Oh, absolutely. It's unbelievable. That's taken some congregations right down the tube.
Well, you know, when we looked at some of the churches that were spending, you know, upwards of $200,000 to build a church. You know, that's a lot of money for a building that
And that's a
technically
small-
only gets
that's a
used for a
small
couple
building.
of hours a week.
Yeah. I mean,
It's kind of a
usually,
waste.
usually it's in the millions that people
Yeah.
are.
And you think about that,
spending.
okay, so you've got room for everybody to meet one day a week.
But typically,
You're using it during the rest of the week.
there was a great little illustration called the life-saving station. If you ever get a chance to kind of look it up online, called the life-saving station. And it was just an analogy about this group of people that came together, and their mission was to go out and save people from shipwrecks. You know, they had one little boat, you know, and they would just go out there, and they had limited equipment, but they'd go out there and they'd save people from the sea. And then they of course, they would bring them in and try to put them back together, restore them to health and whatnot. And eventually they built this little place where they could do that, and everything seemed to be going along well. And then other people suggested, well, hey, look, there's so many people out there that need saving, we need to add another boat. And so they started to grow. This whole mission of saving people from the sea started to grow. And then, of course, they got a bigger building, right? And then people started complaining about, well, you know, the people that we're bringing in, they're all wet and nasty and filthy and whatnot. We can't let them come into this area here because this is our area that we meet in and have our meetings. We need to kind of put them over here in this little corner so that they don't defile, you know, the area that we kind of meet in. And you can see the analogy was describing really church growth and you know, the mission of the church should be to save sinners, to be a part of that mission. But then we get so focused on the building and the operation, you know, and how deplorable the people are that we're saving and how they're bringing in all their nastiness. And we got to protect ourselves and keep ourselves clean from that. I mean, it was a great little analogy.
Susan says, what's the point of a building when everyone is outside those walls?
Yeah, so, you know, we have to be very careful.
And I'd say if I was in a life-saving station rescuing people from shipwrecks, I would rather do an investment in a good lighthouse that would keep the ships from being wrecked on the rocks.
Yeah.
You know, then you don't need the rescue squad as often, but hey, you're protecting them.
So, anyway, if you get a chance to read that, it would be a great little story to read. You can find that on the internet, I'm sure. Okay, so prefer one another in honor, giving preference to one another, not lagging in diligence.
Whereas this one says not slothful in business is the King James.
Really, no. Really?
Yeah, not slothful in business.
How about next one is
What
fervent?
does that mean, not slothful in business? That's something we ought to talk about a little bit.
Slothful. Define that.
What's a sloth?
Miss Encyclopedia.
Slow animal.
Slow.
Okay.
So being
So to be not be
Indifferent.
slothful in business, what does that mean?
Kind of an indifference. Not concerned about.
Lazy.
Not concerned. It's the opposite of diligent, right? Not concerned about diligence
Okay.
and integrity.
Or just the fact that they're not faithful about getting the job done. I mean, a sloth, you've been in places where someone got after you for working too fast
Right.
because you were getting things done and they wanted the job to stretch out longer because they get paid by the hour, and the longer the job takes them to finish, the more money they make.
Right.
And so they wanted you to slow down.
It's called milking.
Yeah. They
Milking
wanted
the
you to
project.
slow down.
I've seen that firsthand.
Right, and so he says not slothful means you get out there and you get the job done. You know, it's not necessarily that you do it as fast as possible, but you get work on it and
Work
get
at a
it
steady
finished.
pace.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
You
being
don't.
slothful in business either kills the business or it's just a waste.
Yeah. So diligence is kind of is the opposite of that.
Right.
Fervent. It says fervent in spirit. What does King James say?
Fervent spirit.
Fervent in spirit. Serving the Lord. Okay. Rejoicing in hope.
What does fervent in spirit mean? We need to talk about it. Don't go on to the next one.
Well, tell me. You
You
acted
gotta
like you
slow
wanted to go
down.
on.
You gotta slow down.
Hey, I'm being diligent. I'm not being slothful. Go ahead. Go ahead.
What is fervent in spirit, guys?
Fervent in spirit.
No good having these words if we don't know what they mean.
Yeah.
Would it help if I look it up in Strong's Concordance?
I can define it by itself, but that's not how defining words works. Like to be fervent in spirit, to have fervor.
What is fervor?
Like almost similar to zeal, I would think.
Okay, it is.
Yeah, Max doesn't look like he's being fervent right now.
It says the biblical usage, fervent is to boil with heat, to be hot. It's a term used of water, and metaphorically it's used in regard to boiling anger, hot love, zeal for what is good or bad, etc.
So it's the opposite of lukewarmness related to Zionism.
So it's a word that means to be hot.
Yeah,
So he wants us to be on fire.
on fire.
But how do you do that? I mean, you know, you've seen places where they claim to be on fire for the Lord. What does that mean? And if it's something we should be, how do we get there if we're not?
It just comes with relationship. You know, experience to some degree. You know, like when I was out in California, my experiences out there, where God worked through a situation or did something, created that feeling of excitement to see God do something
Mhm.
through me.
Good point. Susan
Certainly.
had a comment. Yeah.
Certainly Paul, when you say that Paul was fervent,
Susan
in
says
spirit.
eager and focused.
eager and focused, when you say Paul was passionate,
Well, let's use a human example. Elijah, when you met Elsa, you pursued her with a
Boiling
different... Huh? Boiling water, yeah. I was saying, what does it mean to be fervent in your love for her? Why did you settle on her instead of dating lots of other people? Why did you narrow it down to her? And once you did, what did you do differently?
Which part of the question? That was like 3 questions.
I know it was.
Uh,
Okay, to be fervent, to be have a zeal or enthusiasm, or to be passionate. This is a mindset. When you fell in love with Elsa, you pursued her. You pursued a relationship, which meant spending time,
Spending money.
spending money. There's a lot of things that go into it, but it involved a decision and it involved a commitment. Because you couldn't just go willy-nilly into this and say, okay, I'll see you next month. You can't have a relationship with somebody that is really strong and fervent if you're only talking once a month. right?
That's kind of what it was.
Well,
But we
saying-
talked more than that, but we only saw each other.
Well, you weren't indifferent about the whole
2
thing.
months.
Your attitude wasn't an indifference. I mean,
No.
you were interested in developing that relationship because you saw in her,
She was worth that.
there was value, there was quality, there was all kind of potential that you wanted to pursue. So,
Well, you know, when we talk about animals and mating, we refer to animals as being in heat. We use that
Boiling.
heat term.
yeah, they're
Now,
boiling.
what happens if there is a female in heat and there's an available male around?
Gets his attention.
What is,
That-
how
that's-
does, how
of course,
does the
that's-
male react?
That's hormonal.
Wildly.
That's
So to some
hormonal.
extent.
Yeah.
But I mean, they will let nothing stop them to get to what they want. They will claw walls, they will chew on wood frame, anything that's keeping them from getting there, try to
They'll
dig
eat
under
through
a fence.
drywall, they'll go through fences.
A bull, when there's a cow in heat, a bull will jump a fence or knock a fence down. I mean, they will do whatever it takes to get to what they want. Do we pursue that kind of relationship with Jesus, though?
One thing that makes what you're talking about, it makes me think of a singular focus.
Okay.
You know, if you're focused on one thing, you don't see anything else. You're not distracted. You know, it's like
Right.
a horse with blinders.
Right.
There's focus on one direction.
Yeah.
So just like with him and Elsa, he was only focused on her. He wasn't worried about any other girls that
He
were
made a
around.
decision.
And if we're like that, you know, with a relationship with Christ, you know, yeah, there's other stuff around, but that's our focus and that's where we're headed toward. And I guess, and that's where the on fire thing is, because fire will go as long as it's fueled.
Right.
If our focus is singular, just like a fire would be, it's going to consume whatever is in that direction. And that's where our focus with Christ should be. We go toward Him, and that's where our focus
It basically consumes whatever is in the way.
Yeah.
Now, in our lives, what does that mean? What is in the way of our relationship with Him?
I mean, there's anything.
Almost everything.
I would say almost everything.
Especially
Yeah.
especially
Even
in this time.
ourselves.
Well, yeah, when you look in Revelation, what does it say? It says that we have been made drunk with the cares of this life. We pursue so many other things, you know, job, house,
Retirement.
income, respect. I mean, just everything. Yeah, it could be.
One
Everything.
writer described it as the tyranny of the urgent at the expense of the important. There are all kinds of things screaming for our attention on any given moment.
Yeah, we're bombarded. That's what advertising does.
You ever see that illustration about the lady saying she needed to go out and move her car, so she had to go find her car keys, and it took her a little while to find them because she didn't remember where she put them. So she gets the car keys, and then she realizes, oh yeah, there's some mail here by the door that needs to go out to the mailbox. So she takes the letters out to the mailbox, and on her way back she sees that one of her houseplants is brown and dying, so she needs to go in and get some water. So she goes in and gets some water, and she waters the plant. And she goes through this whole thing of all these distractions, and then an hour or so later, she realizes, I don't know where my car keys are. I can't go anywhere. And she had to go backtrack and go through all of these distractions
Steps.
to find that the keys were right there where she picked up the mail to take it down to the mailbox. But this is what happens to us in life, is we get all these distractions, and it's not that these distractions are evil. It's that we haven't got our focus on what we need to do.
And there's a condition. What's the condition that we call being easily distracted?
ADD?
ADD?
That's me.
ADD?
Guilty as charged.
Yeah. But I'm saying it's the world that has conditioned us to that place, because there are so many things that are up for our consideration. Yeah, I see people back there.
What were you saying, Jeremy? Were you making fun of me? No. No, you wouldn't do that, would you?
Wouldn't do anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the devil's very successful in distracting us, right? What is essential, what's important. Very, very, very much so.
Which means that when we realize we've been distracted and we've lost our focus, we need to make a decision to pull our focus back and get that back in the center.
In fact, it says here, fervent in spirit, are hot in the spirit, on fire in the spirit, serving the Lord. So, there's the thing. Rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation. Well, there's that's a quality there. These are all qualities that God's people are going to need to have.
Patient in tribulation, that's hard.
In order to really survive
No
what
big deal,
what
you
is
say.
ahead.
I don't know. I think different for different people. Like if you were to ask anybody what my demeanor was like when my gym was flooding, I was very casual about it. Like everyone looked like they were way more concerned about it than I was. But I guess that's probably because I've faced enough tribulation to realize, there's no point in getting upset about something you can't stop anyways.
All you can do is treat it and get it over with.
Yeah, you can just sit there and play with the water guns. All right, have fun, kids.
But patient in tribulation, it's the trying of your faith that worketh patience. So once you've had some experience, then the patience is a little bit easier in certain circumstances. But I know for me, my personal tribulation of battling with chronic Lyme disease, it's hard to be patient. I mean, it's really tough. I'm like
frustrating.
everybody else. I want to find a quick solution. I want to find a fix to fix this so I can get on with being normal and
Yeah.
live my life. And the last 4 years, I've been anything but normal. When I find myself moving this far and then falling this far back, you climb up that gravel pile and slide back down again. And it's really hard in a lot of these circumstances to find that patience. I mean, you can continue in faith, but patient in tribulation, that's really tough.
You've been
at
dealing
times.
with it for a lot longer than 4 years.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But I'm saying I didn't know about it until 4 years ago.
Yeah, and I think that it does also come down to, like you said, that building experience where the trying of your faith does work patience. Where I've had situations where certain bills were coming up or certain things were due, and just being patient and waiting for the Lord to provide an opportunity, and then somebody will call me for work, and I'll get enough money to pay that bill that day,
Yes.
and it works out exactly like that sometimes. And most people stress about that kind of stuff, but I had enough experiences, I think, that I don't really worry about it much anymore.
Well, just about always, no matter what you do, if you just wait, you'll find out something.
That's true. And I think, too, we've
It's
talked
just what I've
about,
always learned.
the public depending upon credit so that they didn't really have to depend on God to provide for them. And when you get to the place where you're not depending on anything except Him, the world at large doesn't understand this because they're used to depending on themselves. And when we make a commitment to depend on Him, that's a little rocky at times.
It's hard to depend on someone else.
Yeah. And yet, at the same time, the blessing that comes when you realize that money that you needed was just enough, that came in just on the right time, there's no coincidence with that.
Yeah.
And so that strengthened your faith. You had more confidence in the Lord because you could see His hand in providing it just when you needed it. And Susan says here that the important thing is to keep your eyes on the prize.
Pressing toward the mark. Christianity promotes a message that says that it will set you free. Right? A lot of people that are out in the world are facing lots of tribulation. If people have ever heard the radio program Unshackled, that's all about people that are going through difficulty,
People whose
and
lives have been
trials, and whatnot, and then they find the gospel message and it sets them free. Right? How many people do you think come into Christianity with this notion that it's going to be a cakewalk, it's going to be like a picnic, we're not going to have to face tribulation or trials? Right? I mean, do you think a lot of people come into the church feeling like I'm coming out of all of that and I'm going to be set free from all of that, and yet Paul right here is indicating that tribulation is always going to be a part of your Christian walk, always, but you need to be patient through it. God is going to use it in a certain way. God's going to use it in a productive way. In fact, what does Romans 8:28 say? Now, some of you probably have it memorized. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to His purpose. So, when you put that little all in there, because there's some devastating things that can happen to Christians. There is some tremendous tribulation and trials that Christians face. Look at Daniel in the lion's den. Look at Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego facing the fiery furnace. I mean, you talk about tribulation, you talk about trial I mean, and others have been in similar situations where it was really a death sentence if they didn't do this or that or the other thing. But yet, God says all things work together for good.
You must have said
Is it-
something in cat that really
Is
got
that
his
why we
attention.
have? Is that why we can have patience? You know, tribulation is always going to be there, but how many people kind of come into the faith thinking they're going to get some relief, they're going to get a kind of a respite from the things they've been facing?
But you know, when it comes to being patient in tribulation, let's say you have an injury. What's the worst thing you can do when you're injured?
Nothing.
Well, maybe, but what else?
What type of injury?
Well, I can actually follow up on that. Here, what was it, 2 months ago? 2 months ago, I cracked a couple ribs.
Fun.
Now, for me, given my profession and all that stuff, you take me out of the picture, I'm in trouble. But the doctor told me, he's like, you can't do anything for a month, or else this is going to be
You're going to aggravate.
long-term.
You're going to aggravate the problem.
Yeah. So what I had to do, I had to say, okay, I'm going to sit back and I'm going to not do anything, and there's no need stressing about it because what is it going to do, you know? And it, you know, it ended up all working out all right. But if I would have stressed about it, if I would have flipped out, and then if I would have tried to go like I normally do, I'd probably still be laid up in the bed, not being able to do anything because I tried to take care of it on my own when instead I just need to sit back and say, okay, let things happen like they're going to, you know. So yeah.
What I was going to say about illness or getting injured is the worst thing you can do is panic. You know, you get stuck in an elevator, it stops. The worst thing you can do in that circumstance is to panic. I mean, you got other people in there, you scream, cry, whatever you want to
I can
do.
think of worse things to do when you're stuck in an elevator, but
Well, I'm just saying, panicking doesn't do anything, does it?
no.
So patient, think about the person who's patient in tribulation or patient under stress, who stays cool, calm, and collected when things go haywire. That's the person you gravitate toward too. I mean, if you're in a room full of people and a crisis happens, the person who's calm and confident and takes care of things is the one you end up gravitating toward. You know, so we need to become those people that are calm and trusting.
Well, it's fear that causes a person to kind of go ballistic
Yeah.
when a circumstance arises or something happens. It's the unknowingness and the fear that comes
Right.
with that. So somebody that has, especially somebody of faith that has a connection with the Lord, recognizes already that God is with me. He's promised to be with me. He's promised to take care of me. Not that He would never allow anything to ever happen, but that you can trust in Him versus any situation that you might
It
be in.
has to do too with having a view of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Titus had a comment here. He said that tribulation seems to double the closer you get to God.
Oh yeah.
It does,
I think so. I think so.
which must mean, you know, you stay on that path.
Yeah, but you have to remember too, I mean, the ultimate tribulation is going to come at the end, and so God has to allow us to be conditioned for that. He has to kind of toughen us up a little bit so that we can even survive a lot of that that's going to happen.
Susan says that patience lets you think rationally, find a solution, and be open to his voice in the midst of chaos.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think of that story where it was either the Pilgrim's Progress or something, or just a story, I forget which it was, but where the Christian walk was described as like a cliff that slowly gets more and more narrow until eventually you're taking off your shoes, you're leaving all your belongings, and you're slowly giving up everything that ties you to this world until you have to grab this rope and swing out.
That's absolutely
Ellen
true.
White's story in the Book of Early Writings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I mean, you know, I think
You got a wagon that you're carrying your stuff in. Then finally, the path gets narrower, so now you have to get on a horse.
Put your bags on the horses and leave what you can behind.
And then it gets narrower, so then you got to carry your own stuff. And the whole time you're limiting. You have less and less stuff that you can take along with you. To finally you have nothing. And then the path is so then it has these cords coming down from, you can't see where they're attached, but in faith you grab a hold of them and and continue to make your way toward the mark. That's pressing toward the mark that the Bible, Paul talks about.
I think that's also an excellent way of explaining how the Christian walk does get more difficult.
Right.
The closer you are with God, the more dangerous the journey becomes.
The more He allows to toughen you up.
Well, and the more heat the devil is going to put on you.
Yeah.
I mean, look at how much he tormented Job, with permission, of course, but
Sure.
I mean, he killed everyone in Job's family, pretty much, and took all of his stuff, and did all this horrible stuff to him because Job was a loyal servant.
But we also have the promise, I think it's what, Philippians chapter 1, God will not allow us to be tempted above that which we are able. So He knows what we are made of. He knows what we can take.
Goes on to say that, but he'll provide a way of escape.
He'll provide a way of escape, exactly.
And like, it goes back to that bigger picture too. When you recognize that all the stuff you've accumulated in your life
Yes,
is one day going to
Stuff.
burn up and go away.
yes.
This earth is going to burn up and be recreated. So all of these things that we protect and store and worry about are all going to go away. I remember I watched a really dumb movie, like King Arthur and Guinevere type of movie, those old medieval things. And I think it was the guy that played Sir Lancelot had to go through this gauntlet where they had these knives swinging back and forth, and he had to run through this pathway in order to be a competitor in this tournament or whatever. I don't remember what the circumstances were, but I remember that as people are watching, they're horrified because at any given moment these knives will swing back and catch him, and he manages to get through. And he gets asked later, how in the world did you manage to survive that? And he said, it's easy when you don't care if you live or die. And it had to do with this concept of my life is not my own.
Right.
So whatever happens to me happens. When you have that mindset, then you don't tend to get quite as stressed about the day-to-day stuff because it's all going to go away. And you may have a time where you lose everything, and then you may swing back to the other end of the spectrum and have everything. But if your mindset is stable on trusting Christ to provide and trusting Him to take care of you, then you don't let that stuff worry you as much as the average person probably would worry.
He goes on to say here, not only patience in tribulation, but continuing steadfastly in prayer. Again, how important is that? And you can see how all these things are really connected. You've got hope, you've got patience, you've got being fervent in the Spirit, being diligent. Also, he said in another place, the same guy, to pray without ceasing, right? Pray without ceasing. So there has to be an awareness of a continual reliance on the Lord. I mean, why would you pray to anybody?
Because you have faith, they'll answer.
You have faith, you have trust that an answer is going to come, a solution is going to be there. You see, a way of escape is going to be provided.
I see a little bit of a progression here too in Romans 12, where the first batch of verses have to do with mental attitudes. It has to do with a mindset. Be kindly affectioned with brotherly love and honor preferring one another. Not slothful has to do with a mindset. Fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Rejoicing in hope. Patient in tribulation. Instant in prayer. Those things are all mental preparation. And then it goes to the next, in verse 13, what's the outcome? Distributing to the necessity of the saints. Given to hospitality. Blessed. These are all actions
Right.
that spring out of the mindset.
Right thinking.
So unless you have the right thinking, the right actions
Won't occur.
don't occur. You could do the actions without the right thinking,
Exactly.
but that goes back to the 1 Corinthians
Goes back
13.
to motive.
If I do all these things and I give my body to be burned and have no love, it's worth nothing.
Nothing.
So it has to do with first you have the right mind or heart set, and then the actions proceed out of it.
So distributing to the needs of the saints. Again, people of faith recognize that they come to a place where they recognize that they were sinners in need of a Savior. So, the church is really a hospital, a spiritual hospital, if you will. But when you're in a hospital, you don't want to stay in the hospital forever. You want to get healed, right? When you go to a hospital, you want to eventually get well, you want to get better, and so you want to get healed. And so by being hospitable, right, you're promoting the healing of the people that are in need, and we're all in need. We've all come short, and we all need inspiration, we need fellowship, we need encouragement, we need all this thing, we need to be praying for one another, etc. And so really that's where Paul's taking all of this. We need to be hospitable to one another, and I mean there are so many ways that we can even help one another, not only just through prayer, but we can do it in very tangible ways, right? And the important thing is that you don't wait to be asked. You don't call somebody and say, what can I do to help you? Well, a lot of people have pride, and they say, and they may need all kinds of things, but they'll say, no, I don't really, I'm good, right? I can get through it. You don't wait for that. You just go and you do. You see the need, and you go and you take care of it. You see the need, you take care of it. That's kind of a genuine hospitality.
That way you're not a counterfeit Christian.
Yeah. Well, we're going to probably end it right here. Verse 13 there. Distributing to the needs of the saints. Everybody needs to be a giver. Everybody needs to be a receiver. I can remember when our family lived in Maryland, we knew actually it was a Jewish family that lived around the corner, and I think he was an engineer and she was just a stay-at-home mom. But they were kind of just getting started, and I don't know if it was because of debt, but they lived in kind of a rundown place. They didn't have a lot of money. He may have even been between jobs or something. Well, it was Rose's birthday. This was in February, and it was Rose's birthday. And we decided that we were going to go out for dinner on her birthday. And there we were out at this nice restaurant having dinner together. And she's looking at me, and I'm looking at her, and we knew a lot about Lauren and her husband, right? We had become fairly good friends with them. And so while we're sitting there, we're eating, and we just started getting slower and slower, and there was less conversation. And finally we kind of looked at one another and we said, yeah, we can't do this. Not when we have friends that are in such need. So we left the restaurant. We didn't get dessert or anything. We just left the restaurant and went to the grocery store and bought a couple bags of groceries, right?
Yeah.
And took the groceries over. And this is what we wanted to do.
And they weren't home, so we got to drop them off.
Right, so they weren't even there, which was nice even still. So we were able to actually, I don't think the door could lock. It was that kind of a place. So it was like a cabin kind of thing, and in the woods. And so we just took all the groceries in and put the stuff away and put it on the table. Did we ever leave a note saying blessings?
They
or,
kind of figured it came from us or something. We
But
didn't
anyway,
even know.
that's what we ended up
They called to find out who brought
on
groceries.
her birthday, But that's what happens. I mean, not that we were givers. We were givers at that point, right? But there have been times in our lives where we were on the receiving end, and so it works both ways.
And it's harder to be a receiver than it is to be a giver.
It's harder to be a receiver.
It's harder to get that kind of a blessing from people you care about and get that kind of charity. It's very
You have to be
difficult.
really gracious. I think there's certain emotions that play into it.
Oh, yeah.
But anyway, everybody in their lifetime is going to be on one end or the other. Right?
Susan says it's faith with works. We really do need each other, rightly fitting together so we can reach the world with the gospel.
Yeah. I like those little one-liners, Susan, those little zingers that you bring out. That's good. Call her the zinger lady. Any
She's
rate,
my kindred spirit there.
yeah, any final comment? Well, Elijah, why don't you dismiss us in prayer? We're about to cut down.
Sure.
Oh, Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for this time that we've got to come together and to study your word. And thank you for the blessings that come with that. And we want to ask that, that as we study today and as we would read these things throughout the week and continue our studies in our personal times, that you would make these things true in our own lives. And you would help us to follow your example and to really strive to be more like your Son. To treat each other with love and kindness, and not to be slothful, but to be diligent and fervent, and to do all these things that we can to please you and to honor you and to bring glory to your name. And we ask that for the rest of the Sabbath day that we enjoy each other's fellowship, and that you would bless the food and the time that we spend together. Bless those who are able to watch online as well, and give them a wonderful Sabbath also. This is my prayer in the name of your Son, and for his glory we ask these things.
Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Elijah.
guys, for all the comments and whatnot. I want to thank you for joining us once again, and we pray that you'll have a great upcoming week. God will continue to bless, and we'll see you
It's
right
a
back
great
here
discussion
again
today.
next week, same place, same time. Homechurch.us. Thanks again. God bless.